Hello and welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. Conversations in leadership, life and lessons learned, often the hard way. This week, Bobby and Bridge are tackling the topic of followership. While leadership usually takes the spotlight, the role of being an effective follower is just as crucial to any team's success. Whether you're in the boardroom or on the front lines, understanding how to be a great follower can transform not only your personal growth, but also the dynamics within your organisation. And when do great leaders also need to contemplate being great followers? Join us as we tangent our way around this question and much more in being a leading follower. Hello. How art thou?
Hey, Bobby. I'm good. I'm looking out the window watching a baby pigeon being fed by its mom.
And you have already told me this morning that you are the pigeon whisperer because you saved it, didn't you?
I did. It fell into my garden and I popped it on a roof or higher place so that the mum can continue to feed it. So I'm watching it grow. It's fun actually to watch it grow every day, and it's hopefully we'll be able to fly soon. And that's a bit like, as a leader, you like to watch your followers eventually be able to fly, huh?
Look at that. Look at that amazing segue. We've never been so professional.
I've loved doing the research for this one, actually. It's been really, really interesting. And I found, and I hope I haven't stolen your quote, because I found a quote which just made me laugh, because it said, if you think you're a leader and you turn around and no one is following you, then you're simply out for a walk.
I really wish I had found that. That is amazing. Say it again. That was so good.
If you think you're a leader and you turn around and no one is following you, then you're simply out for a walk.
That is brilliant. I need to put that up somewhere. That is perfect.
And apparently there's some dispute as to who it's from, but it's attributed to a Dr. Chip Wyndham, who was an instructor in a master's program on strategic leadership.
Do you know, I have equally loved doing the research for this. I have been absolutely absorbed by what I've found. And whilst everybody keeps saying, and I know that there's never, ever going to be the same amount on followership as there is on leadership, but I did find a good deal. I think I was in this mode of, oh God, I don't know if I'm going to find anything, because it's always about the leadership. I've found an awful lot about the comparisons between the two. I have to say I found quite a lot of similarities as well. But I ended up getting myself far too absorbed in military doctrine, of which there was the most enormous note on followership and how that was actually interplaying with leadership and servant leadership. And it was brilliant. So I know it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but it almost captured everything else that I found as well, such as Barbara Kellerman. I've found other great stuff by Robert Kelley, and it's got all of it in this doctrine note. So it's almost like I'm telling people now, start with that and then go and read elsewhere, because it's not just about military doctrine. It gives all of the stuff that you would be able to use in an organisation. It was awesome.
That's really cool. So Kelley was one of the ones that I came across, and he's the one who's did a lot of work on followership. And he contended that actually, contrary to what a lot of people think, 80% of an organization's success is generally attributed to the followers rather than the leadership style.
Absolutely, because otherwise you're out for a walk. Yeah,
exactly, absolutely. And so he then, and I'm sure this is in the military doctrine document, then identified these 5 followership styles. And then it all goes on a spectrum of engagement and critical thinking were the 2 things that he divided it up to, and how he identified these
level
followership
of
styles.
Independence and dependence, I think, was the other key factor to it as well.
Yeah, so obviously people are going to be going off to read this doctrine document because it encapsulates everything. Yeah. But there are 5 followership styles: exemplary, conformist, passive, alienated, and pragmatist. And then how you identify which you are, because weirdly, or not weirdly, most people, if they're asked, will go, oh, yeah, definitely exemplary. I'm definitely an exemplary follower. And I think that there was quite a lot of the stuff since then has said, you know, actually you need to be a little bit more self-reflective about that. And so how you identify relates to your engagement and your critical thinking. And that can be, your engagement can be passive or active. And so again, and we can start to recognize that sort of thing, both in the people that we work with and in ourselves, I guess, is whether you wait for direction before you actually take action, or whether or not you take the initiative to start to work out what needs to be done. And then the critical thinking ranges between dependent, uncritical thinking and independent critical thinking. And this is about accepting information on face value without asking any further questions, or not accepting anything and constantly evaluating, analysing and looking for opportunities. And I think that this also links back in a way into some of the discussions we have now about how we gain knowledge and information, particularly in terms of AI and particularly in terms of our, well, just having, all knowledge, the internet. And, a lot of the issues that maybe some of the older generations have with some of the younger generations is this idea of the younger generation saying, look, we've got all information at our fingertips. We don't need challenging education, challenging experience, etc. But I think that certainly, and it's not just the older generation versus the younger generation, it is this idea that, well, where did you find that information? And let's have a little think about where it came from as to whether or not it is information that you can accept, or should we then look for some other things that might support what we're contending, in a way a bit like the flat earth, taking it to an extreme, the flat earth stuff, where people can go, well, I've read this and I've seen it here and it's on the internet. Does that necessarily mean that we accept that as a fact, or do we then challenge stuff? And I do think that a lot of the anger and stuff that we see about what is and is not a fact, which always seems a little bit of a weird thing for me.
That is the interesting thing, because they are exhibiting followership with the fact of the acceptance of facts. So I suppose where my head goes with that is that there is so much more information that people can go and collect these days, that much more easily accessible to. And the younger generations have grown up like that. Whereas we'd be having to go through and wade through Encyclopedia Britannica, or, funnily enough, asking other people for advice, if we ever got, God forbid that anyone ever did that anymore. But the fact is that whilst they are able to collect all of that, how do they know what to do with it? Which goes back to the requirement of being a leader and being a follower. And I think that what the doctrine is also saying is that it's a dynamic state, because whilst you may well lead some of the time, there are other times where you have to be the follower. You're not just the leader. And equally, a follower needs to show leadership characteristics in order to take all of that information that we're talking about, to know what they're doing with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does a lot. I mean, again, on the spectrum, this idea of uncritical thinking, I strongly believe that students should be taught the principles of critical thinking. And there's plenty of adults of all ages that are still unable to engage in critical thinking or independent critical thinking. So yeah, I guess one of the things that I was quite interested in that came up for me, because then you go through the different types of followership. And as a leader, absolutely, I'm just going to find another quote for you. Aristotle. Did you have that one?
Can you stop this? This is my job.
That's what I'm checking. I'm checking now. Okay, not Aristotle. Cool. He who cannot be a good follower cannot be a good leader.
Okay, it's another one I haven't got, but you need to keep checking. If you fuck up the end of this episode, I'm going to be really upset. Yes, I did see that one and thought it was a very good one. But yeah, you can have it. Have it.
Okay, cool. So the exemplary followership is high in active engagement and independent critical thinking. So they think for themselves and can challenge leaders by providing alternative solutions if they disagree, etc., etc. So it depends on your type of leadership, isn't it? For some leaders, those are great followers because They take away a lot of the responsibility, all the pressure to always have the right answers. They can bring new ideas, but they can be challenging, because if you are a leader who, and we talked about this in the last episode, if you're a leader who is not great with helpful criticism, then you may find those type of followers challenging. Although one of the interesting things I saw was that exemplary followers tend to work well with others, which wasn't something I necessarily would have assumed. But anyway, that's apparently come out of some research.
And one of the key things that you would think about with followership is that with followership, you are thinking collaboration, teamwork, execution. That's that collaborative bit. So for an exemplary, effective star follower, then that is high, that they're able to take their critical thinking, they are able to be engaged, and they are able to engage with others. And I guess that sort of makes sense, because with all the stuff that I've been reading about how great followers can become great leaders, what you then don't want is them to lose that collaborative aspect to them when they become the leader. It does make sense for me from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then conformist followers are high in active engagement, but are dependent on critical thinkers.
Say yes.
So they're basically what we might call yes people. Yeah. But they are active doers, but they just unquestioningly follow leaders' directions. So again, so they're still doing stuff. So again, in terms of followership as a leader, you're like, great, they're doing stuff, and they're not causing me any problems because they're just doing what they're told. Love that. But actually, in reality, maybe not as useful for leaders, particularly if you're a young leader, I think, or a new leader, or in an area where you are not necessarily the specialist, because actually lots of times if you're a leader or you're new in an organization, you are not going to be to know everything, and quite rightly you shouldn't know everything. But if you've then got just someone who's just going yep,
mindlessly following, well, the interesting, you say with young leaders or whatever, I came across this book called Turn the Ship Around by Captain David Marquette, who was the captain of a nuclear submarine. Now, I haven't read the book, but short reads, thank you very much. He was talking about the fact that there's him, the leader of a nuclear submarine. Quite impactful if you get things wrong, right? Morale was low, performance was low, and retention was piss poor. And yet he was perceived as a really good leader and had got really great people on the submarine. And then one day he gave an impossible order, and everyone tried to follow it anyway. Now, that's conformist at its most.
Yeah. And
so what he began to realise is that he needed to give them different fellowship skills to move them into the exemplary box. I think that would be a really good read, because if you've got followers in these other boxes, what are the things as leaders that you need to do?
That's exactly the question that I was going to have. And so you've now answered that. If there's this book, great, I'm definitely going to have a little look at that, because absolutely, as the leader, while having followers who are doing stuff is great, but if you fuck up as the leader in terms of what direction you're giving, and there's no one there to turn around and go, hang on a minute, boss. As I suspect we both experienced when we were in the military, where you've had someone who has turned around and someone who's far more experienced than me gone, boss, that's just not gonna work. That's lunacy. And it's like, really? Explain to me why. Well, this. And then you're like, oh, right, okay, okay, definitely. Tell me, explain to me why. Well, this. And then you're like, oh, right, okay, okay, definitely.
And you know how much I hate labels, but that sort of response is the pragmatist. So that I wouldn't even put them necessarily in the exemplary box. So again, I came across this TED talk by a guy called Clive Barrow, who's ex-military. Again, I'll put it in the resources, but he was telling a story about being out in Ireland and doing things that he didn't think were that interesting, like having to be stewards at prison and things like that, doing guard duties. And then they get called out to actually do something in his mind and the mind of many people in the military, which was like something real. A bomb had been found. He's 21 years old as an officer, and he completely froze. So this was the thing that he'd been trained for. and he just froze.
Yeah.
And his corporal just came up alongside him and didn't tell him what to do, didn't take over or anything from that perspective. But what he just went up and said, boss, this is what you've been trained to do. You've got this. Just take a breath and you'll be fine. And it unfroze him so that he could get on and do what was needed to be done. So again, another, I thought, exceptional example of what I would put in that box of exemplary followership.
Yeah.
And probably a corporal who went on, my assumption would be, but that's exactly the sort of corporals that you want, who are going to go on to make exceptional leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then we move on to passive followership.
It's the sheep, yeah.
Low inactive engagement and dependent uncritical thinking. And so they will do what they're told, but they have to be given constant direction.
They're not even saying yes, they're just meh.
And then they'll wait for the next direction before doing anything else. And I think, if I'm honest, those are the type of followers I find the most exhausting. Especially if you're a leader who's trying really hard not to micromanage.
And that's exactly what you end up doing. I was thinking about them. They're the managers I come across quite a lot who I offer in The Manager Meets the Monkey. Because what you're trying to do there is to get people to stop being passive. So they're likely to be the people who will come to you and say, I've got a problem. And then you're expected to fix it for them. Or this has happened and you're expected to fix it, or whatever statement that you have the people coming in. And I spend a lot of time with managers saying, what questions do you ask people who are in the passive box? Because those are the people where you're saying, okay, so what have you tried? What have you tried to do to fix it? Who have you asked? What solutions have you actually got? Well, in which case, the nicest possible way, jog on and come back to me when you've got some ideas about how you might want to do something about it. So it's the coming with not necessarily solutions, but ideas, or the fact that you've at least thought about it before you end up in my office.
Yeah.
And that book, there was a life changer for me. I didn't just have a monkey in my office. I had a troop of silverback gorillas. I think I've said that before, because I was taking on so many people's problems and not moving them from passive to active. And the amount that you can get from performance, if you can actually change them, even if you are moving them in the first instance towards critical thinking, you can help them then with that element so that you move them further around the box, or even into the pragmatist box.
And what's the name of the book, the monkey book?
It's called The Manager Meets the Monkey. And, you know, I can't for the life of me remember who it's by now. Ken Blanchard, I think. I hope I've got that right. Sorry, Ken, if it wasn't you. I call it a 45-minute toilet read.
Oh. I'm sure Ken will be so happy about that. Put it on the reviews on the back.
It's a
45-minute toilet read.
It's meant with a PR sort of angle to it. You can read this on the blog if you're needing 45 minutes piece. No, it's a quick read, but it was life-changing for me. Just that whole element about the types of questions you can start to ask people to shift them from passive to active.
Nice. I've come across the monkey analogy, which is, you know, that just people leave monkeys on your desk or just kind of hand you a monkey. It's like, not my monkey. So I'd come across that, but not the book. So thank you. And the next time I feel the need to go to the loo for 45 minutes, I shall read it. Maybe I'll give it to my husband. He seems to spend quite a lot of time on the loo.
We must not make mass generalisations on our podcast about who spends more time in the toilet. But anyway, let's move on from that. That's probably not what the topic is that we're meant to be talking about.
Okay, then we have alienated followership. So they are highly independent critical thinking, but low in engagement. So they think for themselves, but instead of using that for force for good, they basically just spend their whole time being critical.
I heard it labelled as cynic, the cynic box as well.
Yeah. So they view themselves as mavericks who oppose management, but not in a positive way. And that kind of made me think of when you do a stakeholder analysis and you're kind of identifying what you need to do to bring people into if they're influencers, but they're not, they're negative influencers, how you bring their influence into the positive box, and what communication strategies you use to do that. And so that's a very project management-y approach rather than an HR approach. But I guess it's a similar thing.
I would often say, if you're doing like the stakeholder management map, these are the sort of people that you need. this is going to sound horrible as well, back to toilets again, but the people inside the tent piddling out rather than outside the tent piddling in. And if I bring this back to it being about us, I would absolutely admit to having sat in the alienated cynic box, maverick box, when I'm not as engaged as I should be with the leadership of an organisation. I have definitely been there, and know I'm quite capable of being really quite disruptive, because for the most part, I would be sitting in a Starbucks. I'm very loyal, but if I don't receive the same level of engagement or loyalty, I take mine away. And so I think that my version of that would be for leaders looking at the mavericks. Mavericks often, because again, yay me, I'm not meaning that, but mavericks often have a great deal to offer because of their level of thinking and their level of critical
Yes, absolutely.
But what you've got to do is draw them into wanting to play. So in which case, that's when you really need to get into the human bit of it, because what is it you need to tap into with that person to draw them into that right-hand box.
Yeah, absolutely. And we might have a little chat about that in a minute. There was some more research done on what sort of the needs are for people. And then interestingly, you talking about the questions that as a leader you would ask a follower, and it goes into that. It's from an article which I can't remember the name of it now, but I will pop it in the resources. But the final one, just so that we get some completeness for my brain.
Completer finishing brain, not.
Yeah, well, not that I am a completer, but I'm told there are 5 things. I need there to be 5 things. The pragmatist followership. And so they kind of hold back in terms of engagement and in critical thinking. They wait and see where the land lies, but they tend to maintain the status quo and wait for a crisis to pass before they'll take action. So in a way, the pragmatist is a really good way of describing it, because they kind of are. I wonder, and actually for that, I wonder whether the level of trust is low, because that was one of the needs that was identified. Trust is sort of really impacts, like the alienated follower. I think certainly when I have been in that place has been because I don't feel trust for the leadership. I don't feel recognized. I think you've indicated that word, but I do think there's a trust thing, that I don't trust them to have my best interests at heart, or to have any consideration for me at all, and therefore I am going to just be there going, that's bollocks, it's all bollocks.
I also think in this day and age, when you think about the pragmatist, if you think about the engagement spectrum, with alienated being completely on one end and the exemplary on the other, the pragmatist sits right in the middle of it. And I think in this day and age where roles, jobs are seen as much more transactional than they were in the past, there was the question left for me, is that how do you up engagement quickly in an organisation when people might only stay 2 or 3 years? I mean, when you look at turnover in organisations now, it used to be that much longer and you'd be loyal to the purpose. If I go back to the military is not a job, it's a way of life. So what you're looking for is that purpose to be really, really high. And one of the other things I read about the Army definition, it definitely had the purpose, and that's what kept people, you were always around the same purpose. And so what I do think in this day and age is that whilst people may move on, they are looking for jobs with purpose. That's what will bring them into stronger followership than just being a pragmatist where you basically sit somewhere in the middle, and you'll invest something, you'll invest your time, you'll invest your energy. There'll be something that is enough for you to invest, but that's as far as it goes. And then you'll be popping off to somewhere else in 2-3 years' time and doing the same again. So what is it that gets them to stay for longer? And the interesting thing in this Army definition, because it was saying 3 things, purpose was one of them, but the other one was about an environment where you are creating permission. And the other one is about being proactive. So we're back to the active elements to it. So what are you doing in a culture for the followership to know that they have got this much freedom to make decisions, for this much freedom to just go and do things? What are the parameters that you're setting, but how much freedom do they actually have within that? Because I think that's something that ups that score, that brings them further through. And then what you're looking for is people to be proactive for themselves. that they're taking account for their jobs, that they're taking account for their own development, that
Yeah.
we're not back to the organisation and the leadership are meant to do everything for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that some of the things you're saying, because the other thing that's resonating with me is, so in order to have some of that, there needs to be curiosity. So we're back to curiosity again. You know, the curiosity to, oh, I wonder what happened here. And then the other one is in this idea of leaders creating that space in which people are allowed to try things out. Then we come to one of the needs, which is trust. And the trust that even if you fuck up within those boundaries, that you're not going to get shafted. You know, and we go back to the discussion we had in the episode on blame. And it is a vulnerable space for a more junior person or a new person to try something or turn around and say, I wonder whether this would work, or I've noticed that this is a pain point for our team, and I'm thinking that maybe this might be a solution. To know you're not going to get slapped down, but also if you try it, that if it doesn't work or it isn't the perfect solution, everyone doesn't turn around and go, it's all your fault, this has all gone horribly wrong, we've wasted all this time. And so I think that, you know, as a leader, and again, as a leader, it's a vulnerable space to allow people to make mistakes, and also to have their back, to be the ones who go, yeah, I allowed this, so I'm taking to explain that to your bosses, who are all going, what the effing F is going on with your team this week? And then, of course, it comes back, like, there's all of these synergies from other stuff we talked about, that it's a wave and that it lasts for how long, you know? And so being able to go, if this goes wrong, the impact will be a week, and it's not going to, you know, break the company, and it's temporary. And so I think that it's really interesting that all of those elements come together in terms of trust and curiosity, and a lot of the buzzwords that we've discussed all play a part in that.
I've thought about this. There's something else that I'd been reading, which actually brings in another thing that we've been talking about. So let me say the story quickly. But this is leadership and followership happening all at the same time. So whilst I may well have had a directorate to run in an organisation I was actually in, I was new in the organisation. And so whilst I was director or leader of a team, I also was required to be a follower of the board. It's always my downfall, always my downfall. And recruitment was costing them inordinate amounts of money because they were always going out to agencies and getting the same result, getting the same people or nothing at all. And then they just put out the same advert and they do what they've always done. And so I came in and said, right, we're not doing any of that. We're going to try this. And so without going into the details, it was entirely different. Now, I felt quite within my rights, having talked with the chief exec, that I could just do it just like that, because what I was looking at, and there's all of these things that come out from the purpose element to it and the permission, was that I was actually working not just for me or for the team, but I was working for the greater good. I was working for the much wider organisation. And there's something of the army definition in that about it wasn't passive top down. It was the way that the army describes it is two up. So you're always looking at the thing that you're doing, being part of a much bigger picture. Now, the interesting thing was that the chief exec wanted leaders who were looking at the bigger picture. The board wanted a top-down approach. So, of course, I then go and create this whole new different way of doing it, and basically got into my first ever board meeting with people going, who the hell, not quite like this, but almost to the point of, who the hell do you think you are? What do you think that this was the right thing to do? And I said, look, we can try it once. If it doesn't work, I'll stop doing it. But I said, you're getting the same result over and over and over again. I thought about this. There's something else that I'd been reading, which actually brings in another thing that we've been talking about. So let me say the story quickly. But this is leadership and followership happening all at the same time. So whilst I may well have had a directorate to run in an organisation I was actually in, I was new in the organisation. And so whilst I was director or leader of a team, I also was required to be a follower of the board. It's always my downfall. Always my downfall. And recruitment was costing them inordinate amounts of money because they were always going out to agencies and getting the same result, getting the same people or nothing at all, and then they just put out the same advert and they do what they've always done. And so I came in and said, right, we're not doing any of that. We're going to try this. And so I, without going into the detail, it was entirely different. Now I felt quite within my rights, having talked with the chief exec, that I could just do it just like that, because what I was looking at, and there's all of these things that come out from the purpose element to it and the permission, was that I was actually working not just for me or for the team, but I was working for the greater good. I was working for the much wider organisation, and there's something of the army definition in that about it wasn't passive top down. It was the way that the army describes it is two up. So you're always looking at the thing that you're doing being much part of a much bigger picture. Now, the interesting thing was that the chief exec wanted leaders who were looking at the bigger picture. The board wanted a top-down approach. So, of course, I then go and create this whole new different way of doing it, and basically got into my first ever board meeting with people going, who the hell, not quite like this, but almost to the point of, who the hell do you think you are? Why do you think that this was the right thing to do? And I said, look, we can try it once. If it doesn't work, I'll stop doing it. But I said, you're getting the same result over and over and over again.
Definition of madness.
So what have you actually got to lose? And there was an element of that I should have asked permission. I was like, bugger that. You've put me here as the person in charge, the expert of it. But, one of the things that came up about characteristics of good followers was tact. I think it's the thing that I have struggled with the most my whole life, and will continue to do so, because my passion sometimes overrides being particularly diplomatic with boards. But as it was, just saying, but the recruitment worked that much better, and then it was all okay. But there's the element of, I suppose, the upshot of the story is there's a few things there, but looking wider prevents the silo management that we've talked about before. To be a good follower, you can't be the greatest follower if it's only in your own team. It's got to look wider than that. And then there are a number of characteristics of good followers as well, some of which I have and others that I don't. But also understanding the parameters that you're actually working in, because otherwise I probably could have been seen as alienated rather than exemplary. And the bizarre thing in that story, I was being seen as exemplary by some and alienated by others. It's bizarre.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? But that comes from different leadership approaches as well. And as you say, much as, one of the things, I'm going to sort of hop onto something else that I was going to talk about a bit later, but this idea of managing up, is a really good habit for followers, but also followers who are leading without having the title of leadership. Because I think we'd sort of, there were people who'd spoken to us about that. I don't have the title of leader, but, I am I'm influencing, I'm making a difference, I'm changing things. And so managing up is a skill that is really important to understand how your manager or your leader works, how they communicate, where their boundaries are, and that actually, understanding that and finding out that is a really good thing to do as a follower. But also conversely, as a leader, this idea of hierarchical leadership, where the leader is the boss and everyone else just toes the line, is really becoming more and more outdated. The examples of it, I think many really high-performing organizations have realized it's not the way forward, and that this idea of collaborative leadership is much, much, much more effective and efficient and beneficial in terms of helping people have a purpose. Because if you're just there doing what you're told and that's it, then where do you find your purpose? Where do you find that your why? Where do you find the reason? How do you align your work out whether your values are aligned, etc., etc.? How do you feel that you are contributing if all you are supposed to do is just say yes? And so actually it's much more necessary now for leaders to also understand the diverse needs of their followers, and to understand that Bobby is not always tactful, but she's bright, she's got experience, she's got great ideas, and she gets things done. And therefore, you know what, I can deal with the tact thing. And yeah, okay, she is someone who would rather ask forgiveness than permission.
Story of my life.
But I too, but some of that comes from trust. That if you don't trust the boss or the managers to give you the space, you just think, fuck it, I'm going to do it anyway. Let's hope it'll work out. If it works out, then no one's going to get angry. But other than the ego of the boss who hasn't created the space for me to be creative in the first place. So yeah, and as you said, we found quite a lot of stuff on followership now.
It's very new. I mean, the earliest I found was something like 2018. And what is completely bizarre, though, was that I also read something that said Slim, in terms of the Burma campaign and Defeat in Victory, referred to his people as active followers, not subordinates. And so the piece that I was reading was giving these three key elements around the permission, the purpose, and the proactive. The examples that they gave was Slim from the level of permission, because how much permission his active followers had to do the right thing from his leadership in the Burma camp. So yeah, Defeat and Victory. The purpose piece, they use the example of Martin Luther King, because that is creating a movement, where you have followers from that they're all around one purpose. And I think the other thing that I thought of when I was thinking about that was a television program I watched called Carrot and Stick.
When was this? I've never even heard of it.
It's a while ago, and I think it had some remnants of some idea around the military, but I do see the military as a bit carrot and stick as well, because it's basically the experiment that they were doing was that you'd got one group of people and they were set up in a teepee, and they got lovely fires and they could do what they liked, and then they needed to get themselves ready to do a task together, whilst the other lot, it was all stick. So they were yelled at, they were drilled. There was horrible sort of like bashes that they had to sleep in, and just really nobody being particularly nice to them. And then they go and do the tasks. And to begin with, the carrot team, who had just been stroked and been loved and all the rest of it, were winning. And they would be congratulated and all the rest of it as they wafted on back to their teepee, whilst the stick people got bollocked and had to do other drills and all the rest of it because they'd lost. And then the stick team started winning. And whilst they were still sticked, and given discipline, the carrot team were like, oh, it's okay, better luck next time. Nothing happened to them. And the stick team just went from strength to strength, because basically they had got a common purpose. They had built their purpose around, we have to work together so we stop getting fucked over. At some point, we've got to believe there will be less stick because we are winning. And the carrot team fell to pieces. They argued between themselves. They blamed each other. Their morale was really low. And so from a leadership and followership perspective, but of course the answer was that you need a blend of carrot and stick and situationally to use them. But I thought it was just such a good example of that common purpose and what you do around the common purpose, which says about leadership, for good followers, they also need clarity. They need the intention set, etc. So I thought that was pretty cool as well. And then the proactiveness. Once they gave a story about a junior soldier who just was so accountable for themselves. They understood what their role was, and they were going to go and do it for the best of their ability. So they took on their own training to get better. They owned it, and so there's a level of that being in the good followership camp as well. But yeah, that was a good article of those three key pieces.
So we'll have that in the resources too. So I found that there were generally 4 things that were found to be needed or necessary needs for followers.
Yep.
One was trust. And so honesty, integrity, respect, all of those things that we've talked a lot about. And interestingly, and I guess I kind of know it, but just anyway, seeing it written down was interesting, was that actually talking about trust is different from doing trust. And so there are lots of teams where the leader will talk about trust at every single meeting, but actually high performing teams actually don't talk about trust very much at all because they spend their time acting trustworthy. So the leaders are candid, honest, open about their own struggles, and then create a culture modeling where others can do the same. And to earn trust, so Gallup did a poll, to earn trust, leaders have to trust others first. So it's the leaders who have to do the trusting first. And that kind of seems very straightforward and sensible. But, you know, a lot of times it isn't what it's done. And then delegation. So actually delegating. And I think that this helps with this idea of moving people from certain types of followership, is this idea of not micromanaging, but actually giving real responsibility. And what I liked about this article, again, can't remember the title of it because I took some notes, but I will find it and put it in the resources, was it has a sort of questions that you can ask your team to sort of understand better. And this one for trust was, what task that I currently hold should you take on or own entirely? So that sort of thing, to ask the team, what are the things that you feel ready to do?
That goes back to the monkey management book, because that's the place to start from, about what can you do without having to come and ask me.
Yes. And again, exactly as you said, creating that space, giving them the boundary for the permission. So you're going to be responsible for this, but also giving them the safety of, obviously, if there's any issues, or if you need, if you need things to be escalated, come and talk to me about it. We can talk about it. But, you know, making sure that they don't feel that the moment some tiny little thing goes wrong, that they have to come and go, oh, well, I wondered, what do I do now? Because this didn't work out exactly the way. Yeah. Then there was compassion. So, and this again sort of goes back a lot to understanding your team and genuinely caring about them. So caring, friendship, happiness, love.
Get the love in.
Gotta love, having love in leadership. And all of those help you increase staying in the job because you're more productive, boost engagement, boost profitability. So if you've got someone who is low on the engagement threshold in the followership, then this is one of the things. Listening, we've talked about that a lot. And so the question here was, beyond work, what matters to you and why? So that people understand, so that they feel the whole self. Then stability. And actually, I think that this is a really underrated one that maybe we don't talk enough about, because it is exhausting when you don't know where you stand, when the leader is inconsistent and is like flipping around all over the place. You don't know what's going on. And in actual fact, particularly in these,
VUCA world,
VUCA world, the VUCA world, it's the leader who has to create the stability when there's chaos. And that's the role, is to be that sort of rock that's just the one thing that you can rely on, that you know, because we know that leaders influence like 70% of how things go within, or how teams work. They're influenced by well, we leak. We've had this discussion before. We leak as leaders, and so what we leak out is what is absorbed by the team.
But the interesting thing with that one, though, is that this is where you can see that it's dynamic. That, of course you want the leader to be creating stability, but a leader can't do that by themselves. So there is that level about what in your followership role can you do to bring more stability? Because whilst if you've got poor followership and poor leadership, you're in chaos. And some of the time I have worked for not so organised people, or they may not be the people with the greatest interpersonal skills, or whatever it might be. But I'm in followership. So again, that exemplary follower element is like, you're not necessarily doing, but you're doing things that actually enable leadership.
Yeah. And I think one of the suggestions was communication to clarify. And so while it advises the leader to ask, what are you clear and unclear about concerning your work duties or this situation, that conversely, as you say, a follower can help by asking that question, or to say, from what you've said, I'm still not clear.
And that's when I think that you're in this dichotomy of, is that a leader-like question or a follower-like question? Because the chances are that you may well be in a followership role, but you're having to take on some of the characteristics of leadership in order to make sure that you've got stability or the delegation's right. So we're back to the curiosity and the asking questions style element to it, rather than everybody waiting for the leader to be asking the question.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And then the final one is hope, which I kind of liked, especially because I think last episode you were talking about how you'd identified your EQ as an optimist. One of the things it was, and so that was it. It was about optimism, but it's, again, hopeful individuals are optimistic about their goals, but they also understand there's a need for hard work. But that all is predicated by the fact that you need to have clear goals. And so leadership setting the clear goals and followers taking on a leadership element in clarifying if they are not clear goals, in asking questions to identify. Because I think some of the article was saying that hope happens when you have ideas and energy to achieve future goals. And then the more you do what you do best, the more hopeful you are. So again, the question that was suggested was, what uncertainties do you have about your work's future, and how can I help to boost your confidence? Or what would you like to be doing differently in the next year that would play to your strengths? So anyway, there you go. Those were the
I like that.
Elements.
I like that because it sort of like fits with this piece that I found, which was like this, and I think that's what I've been trying to play back with the things that you've been saying about the differences or the interchangeable bits of leadership and followship. But I think that's in what you've been saying there, because whilst leadership is about inspiring and guiding towards that goal that you're talking about, followship is very much about supporting it, giving your ideas, and then making sure it gets executed. So there's some interchangeable skills for both leaders and followers in there. This article I read was saying the common principles are around communication, collaboration, and commitment, which I think we can see. And then the bit that I loved that tied it together, because I'd sort of like gone a little bit down my military leadership rabbit hole, was the service leadership piece, which of course we have also talked about, but that's very much the human endeavour. And it applies as much to leaders and followers. So that I felt like it really knitted it nicely together. And that's where they were saying that, and I know it's different for people in corporate organisations, but you and I have been in this world where you are serving a nation, but you are equally serving the needs of wider groups, not just your own team, because you're always part of something bigger. You then are serving your leader, and you're also serving your peers and your teammates. So I love the way that the service piece, if we thought about it from that angle, actually brings leaders and followers all into the same place.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm going to have a look again at this. The 2UP thing, I think, is really, really important. It's this idea of kind of understanding where you fit into
bigger picture,
into things. It's really helpful to understanding, giving you purpose. And the service, as you said, that idea of, I'm doing something for good, I'm doing something for others, I'm doing something as part of a bigger thing, all help you, well, certainly my brain react to that, to give me a reason.
I agree.
Gives me more why.
All the types of, I suppose I've been lucky in the fact of being the person working with people, because that, as far as I'm concerned, has given me to access all areas. Because whatever anybody else is doing at the other part of the organisation, it includes people. So invite me in, because if you don't, I'll gate crash anyway. Tact and diplomacy again at its best. But I like working with people for them to understand what they are as the cog in a wider picture. And, you know, and we've been down that
Yeah.
route of job title and function. And if you only think from that perspective, you are linear and you're not looking at the impact that your work, your being, whatever it is that you're doing, has on a wider aspect. So again, I think that it's just I haven't articulated it into some bloody team development program, but it is a case of, where are you looking? If you put your lens wider, where does it need to land to see more, to see what difference you are actually making in a wider field than you're currently sat in?
And it gives you loads more opportunities too, right? And now you get to do your quote.
I'm going to do 2 because you've done 2. I just feel that that's only fair now. So the first one is from a chap called Michael McKinney, and his was, followership, like leadership, is a role and not a destination. So I like that with all the things that we've been talking about. I still prefer the one that you gave first off. I'm going to let you finish with it because I thought it was brilliant. But this other one was, the world is moved not only by the mighty shove of heroes, but also by the aggregate of the tiny pushes of each honest worker. And that's from Helen Keller. I like that one too.
Oh yeah, I love that one. That's really, really, really nice. Yeah, I get to finish with a quote first time. If you if you think you're a leader and you turn around and no one is following you, then you are simply out for a walk.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks for listening. All the resources mentioned are on our website and Spotify page, where you can read, listen, watch, and dig a little deeper at your leisure. Well, if Bridget finds all of her notes, you can. And now, if you could help us out for a moment, please, using your steering wheel, your desk, your legs, or whatever else, let's create a drum roll. Next week, More Than a Lumpy Jumper reaches its 1-year anniversary. Woohoo! So next week is all about being 1 year old. That's all we can tell you right now. Join us then to find out more.